Do the results of our People's Poll surprise you in any way?
Oh, absolutely not. Because if you look in the UK, since 2016, on average, about 74% of polls that run through organisations such as Gallup have said that people are concerned about mass migration. But also, Gallup runs an international poll. It's called the Gallup World Index on Immigration. And if you look at that, that also shows that in almost every country in the world where immigration is increasing, then you'll find that people are becoming anti-immigrant. And if you take, for example, the three countries they use in their latest poll, Peru, Colombia, nations that we don't normally think about as receiving mass immigrants, are also concerned about it too. So globally, this has now become a mass concern for people living in their own countries who don't want to see large-scale immigration.
Stephen, do you think the general British public, are more nuanced in their views towards immigration than these polls reflect? For example, some people might have been very pro inviting Ukrainian refugees to this country, but they don't want to see large-scale, low-skilled immigration.
I think that was always the case. I mean, for example, my family background is that one of an Irish grandmother that came over when she was 14, a Jewish Black American, and an English grandfather. So I'm a product of people that have come to this country legally. Let's make that absolutely clear. So people believe that if you're a legal migrant that's come to this country, they think that you can share and enjoy the rights of everybody else. The biggest concern are for those that come over to this country illegally. But secondly, there is a deep concern by people, and it's shown in polling consistently, about having mass migration related to work, because we do know it pushes down wages for the poorest in society. And that's never changed. It's across every international research that comes out, and the Bank of England did so on this, the World Bank have done this. So people are quite right to say that we're happy to have people come in, but not when it really impacts low-skilled migration and not when it's illegal.
Scarlett, we saw the quite astonishing figures of 1.1 million people coming in 1 year to this country, net migration at over 500,000. Do you think people are overreacting? Do you think there's a lot of xenophobes in this country who just don't want to be liberal to those from outside?
No, I think that the figures look quite scary to some people, but if you actually look at what's happening, so over a quarter of them are students, right? So and the reason the numbers are so high is because of COVID, and there are students coming back to do their things. And the thing about students is, one is we're getting the brightest and the best. Two is they mostly go home afterwards, and they go home actually loving this country, which is a really good thing. But possibly the most important thing is, without foreign students, our universities could not survive.
Scarlett, may I just butt in there and challenge you just on that point? Because if students were leaving, as you say they were, then surely that would be reflected in the net migration figures.
The reason the migration figures are so high this year is because so many students have come back after COVID, right? I mean, they do often leave afterwards, or they get the good jobs, right? Not from British people, but you know, they're going to be qualified. But we have to remember that our universities could not financially survive without foreign students. They just don't get enough money, and foreign students are much more. They pay far more than a domestic student. So that's one. The other is Ukrainians, right? Well, we know that most refugees who come over actually are hoping to go home. So, but we've invited the Ukrainians over. We've invited tens of thousands of Ukrainians, and then there are the Afghans that, frankly, we owe. I mean, most of the Afghans coming to this country, we've put in danger, and there are many more in Afghanistan that we've let down. So actually, once you look at the figures seriously, they're not frightening for other people.
Well, Stephen, I think I must say on the university question, I mean, there's been report after report and anecdotal evidence, certainly, of foreign students essentially getting their visas to join pretty poor quality courses. And then, of course, you are allowed in a lot of cases to bring dependents and whatnot. And, of course, that adds to the burdens on our public services. And we've been told time and time again that migration doesn't add doesn't cause extra pressure to our public services. No, 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 don't worry at all. You know, more migrants work in the NHS than use the NHS. What are you on about? I think that most people see through that now. There must be an impact on our public services.
Well, let's just look at, and I will come and address Charlotte in a moment, but since 2010, net migration has introduced 3.28 million people to this country. They are from the EU and the non-EU, and they're exclusive of students, so it doesn't really have an impact from that. What you see with students in the net migration figures is generally there's only an excess of around 30,000 students that stay here that don't remain. So when you're looking at 500,000 people that have come here as net migration this year, the student numbers don't really have any impact on that at all. The big numbers this year were 371,000 people who received work visas, and of course those 178,000 that have come from the Ukraine. And it's very, very clear that when you put 3.28 million people into the country in the space of 12 years, there are massive impacts on housing. We know that because we get, with asylum alone, £6 million a day for hotels. We know that there are impacts on the NHS and health and education. There are impacts too on other areas that we don't really consider. Water, infrastructure costs, road and rail. All of that because we have an increase in population. And
yes, I guess you could argue, Stephen, that our government, that is government failure. Scarlett, very quickly before we sadly have to finish, what do you make of Keir Starmer's new narrative or rhetoric on immigration, the idea that he wants to wean the economy off cheap labour? Cheap labour.
I mean, I actually completely agree with Keir that what we should be doing is upskilling the British workforce. And it's not good enough that for years and years and years, we relied on skilled workers coming from Europe and Asia and Africa to be doctors in our health service, be nurses in our health service. We had Polish people coming over and doing the housing. I think it's really, really important that we upskill the British workforce so that they can get good jobs.